Jake Morrison floated in the pilot seat of his small mining ship, watching the stars through the front window. He had been alone in space for 3 months now, moving from one asteroid to another, looking for valuable metals and crystals. The work was quiet and peaceful, which was exactly how Jake liked it. His ship was called the New Dawn. It was not a big ship or a fancy ship, but it was his ship. Jake had bought it with money he saved from working in the factories back on Earth. The ship had everything he needed for asteroid mining. There were drilling tools, collection tanks, a small living area, and most importantly, it could travel between the stars. Jake preferred working alone. He did not have to answer to any boss or follow company rules. He could choose which asteroids to mine and when to take breaks. The money was good too. Rare metals from asteroid belts sold for high prices back on the populated worlds. The asteroid belt Jake was working in was far from any major space routes. Very few ships came through this area. That was fine with Jake. He had his books, his music, and his work to keep him busy. Sometimes he would go weeks without talking to another person, just sending brief messages to the mining company. When he made a delivery, today started like any other day. Jake woke up, made coffee, and checked his ship's systems. Everything looked normal. The fusion reactor was running well, the life support systems were working, and the mining equipment was ready. He had found a promising asteroid yesterday and planned to start drilling into it today. Jake put on his work clothes and heavy boots. He grabbed his plasma cutter, which was his main tool for breaking apart rocks and cutting through metal. The tool was about the size of a rifle and could cut through almost anything when set to full power. Jake had used it thousands of times. Over the years, he was about to leave the ship when something caught his attention. The ship's computer was showing a strange reading on the sensors. There was another ship nearby, but it was not showing up clearly on the display. The readings kept changing, as if the other ship was somehow hiding itself. Jake frowned and looked more carefully at the sensor data. In all his years of mining, he had never seen readings like this. Normal ships showed up as clear dots on the screen. This ship seemed to fade in and out, like it was not really there. He tried to contact the other ship on the radio, but got no answer. Maybe it was a broken ship drifting through space, or maybe it was some kind of new technology he had not seen before. Jake decided to be careful. He had heard stories about pirates who attacked lone miners in the outer systems. Jake went back to his pilot seat and watched the sensors more closely. The strange ship was getting closer to his ship, moving slowly but steadily. It was not responding to his radio calls. Jake started to feel worried. Something was not right about this situation. The ship's computer suddenly started beeping with warning sounds. Something was attaching itself to the outside of Jake's ship. The sensors showed that whatever it was had connected to the outer airlock. The door that Jake used to go outside into space. Jake quickly moved to the airlock area and looked at the control panel. The outer door was still closed and locked, but something was definitely outside. He could hear strange noises coming through the thick metal walls. It sounded like scratching or cutting. Jake grabbed his plasma cutter and turned it on. The tool hummed with power and cast a blue light on the walls. He had never used it as a weapon before, but he knew it could be dangerous to living things as well as rocks. The scratching sounds got louder. Whatever was outside was trying to get in. Jake backed away from the airlock and took cover behind some metal boxes. His heart was beating fast. He had always imagined that if pirates attacked him, they would at least try to talk first, maybe demand money or cargo. This felt different. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. For a few seconds, everything was quiet except for the normal sounds of the ship's systems. Jake held his breath and listened carefully. Maybe whatever it was had given up and gone away. Then the airlock door exploded. Metal pieces flew across the room as something burst through the destroyed door. Jake saw a shape that was like nothing he had ever seen before. It was tall, much taller than a human, and covered in what looked like black armor. It had 4 arms instead of 2, and each arm ended in sharp claws that gleamed in the ship's lights. The creature moved into Jake's ship like it owned the place. It turned its head toward Jake, and he saw eyes that were not human at all. They were like the eyes of a giant insect, made up of many small parts that reflected the light. Jake's first thought was to run, but there was nowhere to go. His ship was small, and this thing was between him and the escape pods. His second thought was to hide, but the creature had already seen him. It was looking right at him with those strange eyes. The creature made a sound that was part roar and part hiss. It was a sound that made Jake's bones feel cold. This was clearly a predator, something that was used to hunting and killing. Jake realized that he was the prey, but Jake had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Detroit. He had learned early in life that running from a fight usually made things worse. Bullies and criminals could smell fear, and they got more aggressive when they thought you were weak. Jake stood up from behind the boxes and raised his plasma cutter. The tool was designed for cutting through asteroid rock, but rock was often harder than flesh and bone. If this thing wanted a fight, Jake would give it one. The creature seemed surprised that Jake was not running away. It tilted its head like a confused dog. Maybe it was used to its prey being more afraid. Jake used this moment to study his enemy. The creature was about 12 feet tall and covered in natural armor that looked like the shell of a beetle. Its 4 arms were long and powerful, with claws that could probably cut through metal. It moved smoothly and quietly, like a cat preparing to pounce. Jake noticed that the creature's armor was not perfect. There were gaps at the joints where the arms connected to the body. There were also what looked like breathing holes along its neck. If Jake could hit one of these weak spots with his plasma cutter, he might be able to hurt it. The creature raised one of its arms and pointed a clawed finger at Jake. It made another sound, quieter this time, almost like it was talking. Jake could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. The creature was telling him that he was going to die. Jake tightened his grip on the plasma cutter and smiled. It was not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that came before a fight. "You picked the wrong guy to mess with," Jake said out loud. Even though he was sure the creature could not understand English, the creature's insect eyes seemed to shine brighter, and it crouched down like it was about to attack. Jake raised his plasma cutter and prepared to defend himself. He had no idea what this thing was or where it came from, but he knew one thing for sure: he was not going to die without a fight. The creature moved faster than Jake thought possible. One moment it was crouched near the broken airlock, and the next moment it was flying through the air toward him. Its 4 arms spread wide like the wings of some terrible bird, claws reaching for his head and chest. Jake threw himself to the side, just as the creature landed where he had been standing. The metal floor rang like a bell as the creature's claws struck it, leaving deep scratches in the steel. Jake rolled behind a stack of mining equipment and came up with his plasma cutter ready. The creature turned toward him with smooth, liquid movements. It did not seem angry or excited about missing its first attack. Instead, it looked calm and patient, like a cat that knew the mouse could not escape for long. It made that strange talking sound again, and Jake got the feeling it was laughing at him. Jake pressed the trigger on his plasma cutter. A bright blue beam shot out and hit the creature in the chest. The beam was hot enough to melt through solid rock, but it only left a black mark on the creature's armor. The creature looked down at the mark, then back at Jake. If it could smile. Jake thought it would be smiling now, but Jake noticed something important. The creature had stepped back when the beam hit it. The plasma cutter had not cut through its armor, but it had felt the heat. That meant the armor was not perfect. Jake just needed to find the right spot to hit. The creature began walking toward Jake, moving slowly and carefully. It was not in a hurry anymore. It had tested Jake's weapon and found it was not very dangerous. Now it could take its time and enjoy the hunt. Jake backed away, keeping the mining equipment between himself and the creature. His ship was not very big, and there were not many places to hide. He needed to think fast or this fight would be over. Quickly, the creature reached out with one of its long arms and pushed aside a heavy drilling machine like it weighed nothing. The machine crashed into the wall with a loud bang. Jake could see the muscles moving under the creature's black armor. It was incredibly strong. Jake fired his plasma cutter again, this time aiming for the creature's neck where he had seen the breathing holes. The beam hit the target, and the creature made a sound like steam escaping from a pot. It jerked its head back and touched the burned spot with one of its claws. This time the creature did look angry. Its insect eyes flashed with a different light, and it made a deep growling sound. Jake had heard it, and it did not like being hurt. The creature was learning that this human was not as helpless as it had thought. The creature jumped forward again, but this time Jake was ready. He dove under a low table and crawled toward the door that led to the rest of the ship. The creature's claws scraped along the table's metal surface as it tried to grab him. Jake reached the door and slapped the control button. The door slid open, and he rolled through into the ship's main corridor. The creature was right behind him, moving through the door with frightening speed. The corridor was narrow, which Jake hoped would work in his favor. The creature was big and would have trouble moving quickly in tight spaces. Jake ran toward the ship's engine room, his boots ringing on the metal floor. Behind him, the creature was making frustrated sounds. It was too big to run easily in the narrow corridor, and it kept bumping into the walls and ceiling. Jake could hear its claws scraping against the metal as it tried to move faster. Jake reached the engine room and quickly closed the door behind him. He locked it and then looked around for something to block it with. The engine room was full of heavy machinery and spare parts. Jake pushed a large tool cabinet in front of the door. The door shook as the creature hit it from the other side. Jake could hear it scratching and pounding, trying to break through. The door was strong, but Jake knew it would not hold for long. The engine room was where Jake kept most of his tools and spare parts. If he was going to survive this fight, he would need to get creative. The plasma cutter was not powerful enough to cut through the creature's armor, but maybe he could make something that was. Jake looked at the ship's fusion reactor. It was a small unit, but it produced enormous amounts of energy. The reactor was surrounded by safety systems and protective shields, but Jake knew how to work around those. He had fixed many reactors during his years as a miner. The door shook harder, and Jake heard the sound of metal beginning to crack. He worked quickly, connecting power cables from the reactor to his plasma cutter. If he could boost the power level, maybe he could make the beam hot enough to cut through the creature's armor. The door exploded inward just as Jake finished his work. The creature flowed through the opening like black water, its 4 arms reaching in all directions. It saw Jake standing near the reactor and made that laughing sound again. Jake raised his modified plasma cutter and pulled the trigger. The beam that came out was twice as bright as before and made a crackling sound like lightning. The beam hit the creature in the shoulder, and this time it went through the armor like a hot knife through butter. The creature screamed. It was a sound unlike anything Jake had ever heard, high and sharp and full of pain. Black blood splattered on the floor as the creature grabbed its wounded shoulder with 2 of its other arms. For the first time since the fight began, the creature looked at Jake with something like respect. This small human had managed to hurt it badly. The creature was beginning to understand that it had made a mistake. Jake did not waste time celebrating. He knew the creature was far from defeated. He backed toward another door, keeping his modified plasma cutter pointed at the creature. The extra power was making the tool very hot, and he could smell burning plastic from the handle. The creature followed him, but more carefully now. It kept its wounded arm close to its body and used the other 3 to move. Black blood left a trail on the floor behind it. The creature's insect eyes never left Jake's face. Jake reached the door to the ship's storage area and back through it. The storage area was full of boxes and containers, creating a maze of hiding places. Jake thought he might be able to use this to his advantage. The creature came through the door and stopped. It looked around at all the boxes and containers, trying to figure out where Jake might be hiding. Its head turned back and forth like a hunting dog trying to catch a scent. Jake was crouched behind a stack of food containers, watching the creature through a gap between boxes. He was thinking about his next move. The modified plasma cutter had worked, but it was using too much power. The ship's reactor could not supply that much energy for very long without overheating. The creature began moving through the storage area, checking behind boxes and containers. It moved quietly despite its size, and Jake realized it was a very good hunter. It knew how to track prey and how to be patient. Jake needed a new plan. He could not keep running around the ship forever. The creature was stronger and faster than him, and it would eventually corner him. He needed to find a way to end this fight quickly. Jake looked at the storage containers around him. Many of them held mining explosives and industrial chemicals. An idea began to form in his mind. It was dangerous, but it might be his only chance. The creature was getting closer. Jake could hear its breathing and the soft sound of its claws on the metal floor. He gripped his plasma cutter tighter and prepared to make his move. Jake waited until the creature was close enough to touch the container he was hiding behind. Then he grabbed a small mining explosive from the box next to him and rolled it across the floor toward the creature's feet. The explosive was designed to break apart asteroid rock, and it would go off in 5 seconds. The creature looked down at the small round object rolling toward it. For a moment, it seemed confused. It had never seen anything like this before. The creature reached down with one of its claws to pick up the strange object. The explosive went off with a loud bang and a bright flash of light. The creature was thrown backward into a stack of metal containers. Black blood splattered on the walls, and the creature made that screaming sound again. Its leg was badly hurt, and it was having trouble standing up. Jake did not wait to see how badly the creature was injured. He ran toward the door, but not before grabbing more explosives from the storage boxes. He now had a weapon that could really hurt this thing. The creature got back on its feet and came after Jake, but it was moving slower now. One of its legs was not working properly, and it had to use its arms to help it walk. Jake had evened the odds a little bit. Jake ran into the ship's main corridor and headed toward the control room. He had an idea, but he needed to reach the ship's computer system to make it work. Behind him, he could hear the creature following, its claws scraping on the floor as it dragged its injured leg. Jake reached the control room and quickly sat down at the computer. He began typing commands into the system, working as fast as he could. The ship had many automated systems that Jake rarely used, but now they might save his life. The creature appeared in the doorway of the control room. It was breathing heavily, and black blood was dripping from its wounded leg. But its insect eyes still glowed with the desire to kill. It was not going to give up easily. Jake finished typing and pressed the enter key. Suddenly, all the lights in the ship went out. The only light came from the glow of the computer screens and the emergency lighting along the floor. The creature stopped moving and looked around, trying to figure out what had happened. Jake had turned off the main power systems and switched the ship to emergency power. This meant most of the ship's systems would not work normally, but it also meant Jake could control things the creature would not expect. Jake pressed another button, and the artificial gravity in the ship turned off. Suddenly, Jake began floating in the air. The creature, which was much heavier, also began to float, but it was clearly confused and uncomfortable. It had never experienced zero gravity before. Jake pushed himself off from his chair and floated toward the ceiling. The creature tried to follow him, but could not control its movement in the weightless environment. It bumped into walls and furniture, making frustrated sounds. Jake pulled out another explosive and threw it at the creature. In zero gravity, the explosive moved slowly and predictably, but the creature could not get out of the way fast enough. The explosive hit the creature in the chest and went off. The creature was thrown across the room by the explosion. It hit the far wall hard and left a dent in the metal. More black blood floated through the air in small droplets. The creature was hurt badly now, but it was still alive and still dangerous. Jake turned the gravity back on, and everyone fell to the floor. Jake landed on his feet, but the creature crashed down hard on its injured leg. It made a sound of pain and anger. Jake ran out of the control room and headed toward the engine room again. He had more ideas for how to use the ship's systems against this creature. He was learning that humans had one big advantage over this alien hunter. Humans knew how to use tools and change their environment. The creature followed Jake, but it was moving much slower now. It was hurt in several places, and it was starting to understand that this fight was not going the way it had expected. The creature had hunted many different kinds of animals on many different worlds, but it had never fought anything like a human before. Jake reached the engine room and began working on the ship's environmental systems. Every spaceship had systems for controlling air pressure, temperature, and humidity. Jake began changing these settings in ways that would make the creature uncomfortable. First, he raised the temperature in the ship to over 100 degrees. Then he lowered the air pressure and changed the mixture of gases in the air. The creature was from a different world and was used to different conditions. These changes would make it harder for the creature to breathe and move normally. The creature entered the engine room just as Jake finished making these changes. Already, Jake could see that the creature was having trouble. It was breathing harder, and its movements were becoming more sluggish. The hot, thin air was affecting it. Jake had also prepared another surprise. He had rigged the ship's fire suppression system to spray industrial coolant instead of fire retardant. The coolant was extremely cold and would freeze anything it touched. When the creature got close enough, Jake activated the fire suppression system. Jets of freezing coolant sprayed from nozzles in the ceiling, covering the creature in ice-cold liquid. The creature screamed as the coolant hit its body, steam rising. From its hot armor, the extreme cold made the creature's armor brittle. Jake raised his plasma cutter and fired at the creature's chest. This time, the beam cut deep into the armor, which cracked and split like broken glass. The creature staggered backward, black blood flowing from the wound. Jake realized he was winning this fight. The creature that had seemed so powerful and dangerous when it first broke into his ship was now hurt, tired, and confused. It was learning that being the biggest and strongest did not always mean being the best fighter, but Jake also knew the fight was not over yet. Wounded animals were often the most dangerous, and this creature still had 3 good arms and a lot of fight left in it. Jake needed to stay smart and keep using his advantages. The creature looked around the engine room and seemed to notice all the machinery and equipment for the first time. It was beginning to understand that Jake was using the ship itself as a weapon. Everything in the human's environment could be turned into something dangerous if Jake moved to another control panel and began shutting down different systems throughout the ship. Each system he turned off was part of a larger plan. He was turning his ship into a trap, and the creature was already caught inside it. The creature tried to charge at Jake one more time, but its movements were slow and clumsy. The hot air, the cold coolant, and its injuries had taken their toll. Jake easily stepped aside and let the creature crash into a bank of computers. Jake looked at the creature lying on the floor, breathing heavily and bleeding from multiple wounds. For the first time since the fight began, Jake felt like he might actually survive this encounter. But he also felt something else, curiosity about what this creature was and where it had come from. The creature looked up at Jake with its strange insect eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake could see something like surprise in those alien eyes. The creature was learning that humans were not the easy prey it had expected them to be. Jake kept his plasma cutter pointed at the creature, but he did not fire. He wanted to see what the creature would do next. The fight had become something more than just a battle for survival. It had become a learning experience for both of them. The creature slowly got back on its feet, using its arms to support its injured leg. It looked at Jake with what might have been respect. This small human had taught it something important about the dangers of underestimating an opponent. The creature stood in the engine room, looking at Jake with its strange compound eyes. Both of them were breathing heavily. The creature was hurt badly, with black blood dripping from several wounds. Its armor was cracked and burned in many places. But it was still alive, and Jake knew it was still very dangerous. Jake was tired too. He had been fighting for hours, running through his ship and using every trick he could think of. His clothes were torn and dirty, and he had small cuts on his hands from handling the mining explosives. But he was still alive, which was more than he had expected when this fight started. The creature made a soft sound, almost like it was talking to itself. It looked around the engine room at all the damage Jake had caused. Broken equipment, scorch marks on the walls, puddles of coolant on the floor. The creature seemed to be thinking about something. Jake kept his plasma cutter pointed at the creature, but he was also thinking. He had learned a lot about his enemy during this fight. The creature was strong and fast, but it was not very good at adapting to new situations. It seemed to expect its prey to act in predictable ways. The creature had probably hunted many different kinds of animals on many different worlds. But Jake was willing to bet that most of those animals just ran away or tried to hide. They did not fight back with tools and traps and environmental controls. Jake moved slowly toward one of the control panels on the wall. He wanted to check the ship's status and see what systems were still working. The creature watched him, but did not try to attack. It seemed to be learning caution. The ship's computer showed that many systems were damaged or offline. The life support was still working, but the main power grid was unstable. Jake had pushed his ship hard during this fight, and it was starting to show the strain. But Jake also saw something that gave him an idea. The ship's manufacturing unit was still online. This was a small 3D printer that Jake used to make replacement parts and tools while he was far from any space stations. If he could reach it, he might be able to make something that would end this fight once and for all. The manufacturing unit was in the workshop, which was on the other side of the ship. From the engine room, Jake would have to get past the creature to reach it. But he had an idea for how to do that. Jake started walking toward the door, moving slowly and keeping his plasma cutter ready. The creature turned to follow him, its claws clicking on the metal floor. It was still hurt, but it was not going to let Jake leave without a fight. Jake reached the door and stopped. He turned back to look at the creature and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You want to know what makes humans different from other animals?" Jake asked, even though he knew the creature could not understand his words. "We do not just use tools, we make new tools." Jake pressed a button on the wall, and suddenly the engine room was filled with the sound of alarms. Red lights flashed on and off, and a computerized voice began speaking. "Warning. Fusion reactor overload detected. Emergency shutdown in 60 seconds. The creature looked around in confusion and alarm. It did not understand the words, but it could tell that something bad was about to happen. The machine sounds were getting louder, and the lights were flashing faster. Jake ran through the door and slammed it shut behind him. He had not actually caused a reactor overload, but he had programmed the computer to make it sound like he had. The creature would waste time trying to figure out what was happening, giving Jake a head start. Jake ran through the corridors toward the workshop. Behind Him. He could hear the creature pounding on the engine room door and making frustrated sounds. It had figured out that Jake had tricked it, and it was angry. Jake reached the workshop and quickly locked the door behind him. He went to the manufacturing unit and began programming it to make what he needed. The machine hummed to life and started working, building his new weapon layer by layer. The door shook as the creature hit it from outside. Jake could hear its claws scratching at the metal, trying to find a way through. The door was strong, but Jake knew it would not hold forever. The manufacturing unit finished its work and produced what Jake had designed. It was a new type of ammunition for his plasma cutter, specially designed to work against the creature's armor. The ammunition looked like small metal bullets, but they were hollow inside and filled with explosive material. Jake loaded the new ammunition into his plasma cutter. Just as the creature broke through the door flew off its hinges and crashed into the far wall. The creature flowed through the opening like black water. Its four arms spread wide, but this time, Jake was ready for it. He raised his plasma cutter and fired. The new ammunition hit the creature in the chest and exploded inside its body. The creature screamed and staggered backward, black blood spraying from the wound. Jake fired again, this time hitting the creature in its wounded leg. The explosion shattered the leg completely, and the creature fell to the floor. It tried to get up using its arms, but Jake fired a third shot that hit it in the shoulder. The creature was down, but it was not dead yet. It looked up at Jake with its compound eyes, and Jake could see something like surprise in them. The creature was learning that it had badly underestimated humans. Jake approached the creature carefully, keeping his plasma cutter ready. The creature tried to swipe at him with one of its remaining good arms, but it was too weak to be dangerous anymore. "You made a mistake," Jake said to the creature. "You thought being big and strong was enough. But humans learned a long time ago that the best weapon is not the biggest one. It is the smartest one." The creature made a soft sound that might have been agreement. It was dying, and it knew it. But it was also learning something important. Humans were not just another prey species. They were something much more dangerous. Jake stood over the creature and thought about what had happened. A few hours ago, he'd have been a simple asteroid miner, living quietly and bothering nobody. Now, he was a warrior who had defeated one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. But Jake also realized that this creature was probably not alone. If there was one of them, there were probably more. And if they were hunting humans, then other people might be in danger. The creature looked up at Jake one last time. Its eyes were growing dim, but Jake thought he saw something like respect in them. The creature had learned its lesson, but it had learned it too late. Jake walked to the ship's communication system and began recording a message. People needed to know what was out here in the dark spaces between stars. They needed to know that humans were being hunted, and they needed to know how to fight back. As Jake recorded his warning message, the creature died quietly on the workshop floor. It had come to Jake's ship expecting an easy hunt. Instead, it had discovered that humans were not prey at all. They were predators too, and they were very good at learning new ways to survive. Jake looked down at the dead creature lying on his workshop floor. The alien hunter that had seemed so terrifying just hours ago now looked smaller somehow. Its black armor was cracked and broken, and its strange insect eyes no longer glowed. With predatory intelligence, Jake felt a mix of emotions he had not expected. Relief, of course, because he was still alive, but also sadness and curiosity. This creature had come from somewhere far away, across the vast darkness of space. It had a life and probably a family of its own kind. Now it was dead because it had chosen to hunt the wrong prey. Jake knelt down next to the creature and examined it more closely. The armor was not metal like he had first thought. It was some kind of natural shell that had grown from the creature's body. The claws were sharp as knives and looked like they could cut through almost anything. This was clearly a creature that had evolved to be a perfect killer, but evolution had not prepared it for humans. Jake stood up and walked to his communication console. He needed to send a message to Earth and the other human colonies. People needed to know that there were dangerous aliens out there, and they needed to know how to fight them if they had to. Jake began recording his report. He described the creature in detail, how it had attacked his ship, and how he had managed to defeat it. He explained the weapons and tactics that had worked and the ones that had not. Most importantly, he tried to explain what he had learned about human advantages in combat. The creature was stronger than any human, Jake said into the recording device. It was faster, tougher, and had natural weapons that we do not have. By all rights, it should have killed me easily. But it made one big mistake. It thought that being the biggest predator made it the deadliest predator. Jake paused in his recording and looked back at the dead creature. Humans are not the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy. But we have something that this creature did not expect. We can think our way out of problems. We can use our environment as a weapon. We never stop learning and adapting. Jake finished his report and sent it toward Earth. The message would take months to reach home, traveling at the speed of light across the enormous distances between stars. But eventually, people would know what had happened here. Jake also examined the creature's ship, which was still attached to the outside of his vessel. The alien ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was grown rather than built, like a giant shell or cocoon. Inside, there were no computers or control panels that Jake could recognize. Everything seemed to be controlled by the creature's nervous system. But Jake found something interesting in the alien ship's memory banks. The creature had not been working alone. It was part of a larger group, a species that traveled from star to star hunting other intelligent life forms. They called themselves the Zithek, and they had been hunting for thousands of years. The creature had been transmitting information back to its people throughout the fight. Every tactic Jake had used, every weapon he had created, every advantage he had gained. All of this information had been sent across space to the other Zithek hunters. At first, Jake was worried about this. It meant that other Zithek would know how he had won, and they might be prepared for human tactics if they attacked other people. But as Jake thought about it more, he realized this might actually be a good thing. The Zithek had learned that humans were not easy prey. They had seen how a single human, working alone with basic mining equipment, had defeated one of their best hunters. They had seen how humans could turn any environment into a weapon, how they could create new tools and tactics in the middle of a fight. Jake hoped that this knowledge would make the Zithek think twice before attacking other humans. Maybe they would decide that humans were too dangerous to hunt. Maybe they would look for easier prey elsewhere in the galaxy. But Jake also knew that some of the Zithek might see humans as an interesting challenge rather than a threat to avoid. There would probably be other attacks, other hunts. Humanity needed to be ready for them. Jake spent the next several days repairing his ship and studying the alien technology. He took detailed scans and photographs of everything, creating a complete record that he could share with human scientists and military experts. The more humans knew about the Zithek, the better they could defend themselves. Finally, Jake was ready to leave. He carefully disposed of the creature's body by launching it into space, along with most of its ship. He kept only small samples and detailed recordings for the scientists back home. Jake did not want to travel through space carrying a dead alien predator. As Jake prepared to leave the asteroid belt where all this had started, he thought about how much his life had changed. A week ago, he had been a simple miner, worried about quotas and profit margins. Now he was carrying information that might determine humanity's survival in a hostile galaxy. Jake's ship, the New Dawn, was damaged but still spaceworthy. The fusion reactor was running well, and the life support systems were working normally. Jake plotted a course for the nearest human colony, where he could make repairs and send his detailed report to Earth. The journey would take several weeks, giving Jake time to think about what had happened. He found himself wondering about the Zithak and their hunting culture. Why did they hunt intelligent species instead of animals? What did they do with their prey? Were there other species in the galaxy that had fought back successfully? Jake also thought about the message that the dead creature had sent to its people. The Zithak now knew that humans were dangerous in ways they had not expected. They knew that humans could think quickly under pressure, that they could use tools in creative ways, and that they never gave up fighting. Most importantly, the Zithak had learned that humans were not individuals to be hunted one at a time. They were part of a larger community that shared knowledge and helped each other survive. When one human learned how to fight the Zithak, all humans would learn. 3 weeks later, Jake's ship arrived at New Shanghai Colony. The space station was bustling with activity as usual, with cargo ships coming and going and miners bringing in their loads of valuable metals and crystals. Jake docked his ship and immediately requested a meeting with the colonial administrator. He had a story to tell that would change everything humans thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Within hours, Jake's report was being transmitted to Earth and every other human colony. Scientists studied his data, military experts analyzed his tactics, and engineers began designing new weapons based on what Jake had learned. The dead Zithak hunter had taught humanity their first lesson about the dangers of interstellar space. But Jake had taught the Zithak an important lesson too. Humans might look small and weak, but they were the most dangerous kind of predator in the universe. They were the kind that learned from every fight, shared that knowledge with others, and never stopped getting better at survival. Jake returned to his mining work, but he was no longer alone in the darkness between stars. Now he carried weapons designed specifically for fighting aliens, and his ship was equipped with the best early warning systems that human technology could provide. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but humanity was no longer defenseless. They had learned that their greatest weapon was not strength or speed, but the ability to turn any challenge into a learning opportunity. And they were very fast learners.